Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie The Killing of Billy the Kid. Now, this is actually the second B22 film that I've reviewed here so far this year. The first one was The Doc, which is a film that is going to be coming out on Xumo along with this movie too as a Xumo original. I like this film as well too, which I got confirmation from Brett, the writer-director of this movie, that it'll be, as far as The Doc's concerned, it's going to be released on the Xumo platform on March 1st, if I recall correctly. So be on the lookout for that. Whereas this film, on the other hand, it's expected to be releasing sometime in the beginning of June. So around the very beginning parts of the summer, at least at this point right now. So this film is still a bit of ways to go before it's released here. But I had the opportunity to check out this film. I do remember them putting in an open cast call for someone to play the character of Billy the Kid that fits the description that they were looking for that respective character. And they ended up finding an actor who I think did a really good job, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But I just also remember, too, the amount of people that were also involved in the film in terms of the cast, which one thing that stuck out for me was the fact that, honestly, it had to do with the actor Tom Hallam, who was literally, no joke, is one of my favorite actors of all time. I think Tom Hallam is a severely underrated actor. And this movie, I think he's got one of his best performances that we ever got to see from him in this respective film, which, again, I'll be getting into in a little bit. There's a lot of things that I was more or less anticipating from this movie. When I remember when I first saw the official stills for this film on the B22 social media platforms, as well as Brett Bettman's platform, and also with Tiffany Bettman's social media as well too. Just seeing the imagery of the stills, I thought looked absolutely beautiful. And then when I saw the trailer, I was literally excited for what they were going to be pulling up with this film. And I can truthfully say that this movie was so good. I love this film. I actually thought, I'm not sure if you've seen my reviews that I did for The Doc that came out earlier this year here on the channel, but I had said towards the end of the review that I expect this movie to be as good as The Doc, if not even better, just based on the images alone that I happen to see on the B22 and Brett and Tiffany's social media accounts. And this movie exceeded all its expectations for me personally. There was a lot that I will get into this film here. And, I'm going to say one thing, too, as I get into this review, that, for anyone who doesn't know the history of Billy the Kid, we know that this kid meets his demise. So that's essentially the plot right there. I mean, the title pretty much gives that away. But there are going to be certain subtle details that I'm not going to be revealing here just in this review, because there were some nice, genuine surprises in terms of character arcs, if you will, that I think really worked out quite well. And for me to reveal that, I think may slightly ruin that experience there for you. But as far as the overall plot synopsis is concerned, it's pretty simple, which I'll get into in a little bit. But of course, I'll be getting into the plot synopsis, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. Buffalo hunter turned sheriff Pat Garrett devises a plan to track down and kill the infamous Billy the Kid. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this film, what I'm going to highlight for you is going to be the look of the film. That's actually something that I remember distinctly thinking right away when I first saw the still images that B22, Brett, and Tiffany had released on their social media accounts, because I remember the quality of the picture just looked so beautiful, in my opinion. It had this really high def aspect to it that I really did appreciate, considering that this is a Western. And I've said before in some other reviews that the Western genre is not necessarily my favorite genre, and there's a certain look to a Western film that works well. In some cases, doesn't always work that well for me, just depending on the film, of course. But it's nice to see a Western film that has that really clear picture quality, that high def quality that I think for me really works in the favor for the movie. In this particular case, that's the reaction that I got from this film, because I remember distinctly thinking when in the opening shot of the film, you get like these I believe they're more like stock footages, if you will, of the Civil War from some reenactment of some actors who were doing the reenactment of the Civil War itself. And then once you get past all that for the opening sequence, the first image you get is of Tom Hallam like staring right into the camera, and that shot right there, the way that it looked, just looked beautiful. And so the cinematography is phenomenal in this movie as well too. But one other thing I also want to point out too is that apart from the look of the film, there's also a certain what's the best way I could describe it to a certain I think I'm not sure if the best way to describe it is feeling, but there's a certain texture to this movie that I thought worked very well when it came to not necessarily feeling the griminess and the all the smokiness that you see in the certain scenes in the movie. It actually had like a really nice just openness to it. I think it's the best way I could describe it. It just seemed like there's a lot of space and you have time and room to breathe. So I'm not sure if that's kind of the best way for me to describe with what I got across the film in the first couple minutes of the movie. Like, it just seemed like it was a film that really took its time to just allow for the environment, for the imagery to really settle in with you, and it worked immediately. At least it did for me personally, and that was for me a really good sign. But then at the same time, you also started to notice too that the sound quality for the film as well had also gotten better. And I'm also going to point out too about the musical cues that occur in this film. So, for example, when Tom Zimbrod, who plays more or less the deputy in this movie, along with Tom Hallam, who is the sheriff in this film, there is a partnership that they have where you can tell pretty much that, you know, who is more or less the alpha, who is pretty much the beta or the omega, if you will. But when you hear the musical cues that come through, especially when Tom Zimbrod makes his first appearance in the movie, there's just like this weird guitar twang that comes through, and automatically, I remember distinctly thinking this is like a classic cue where you can tell that there's a comedic beat that this character that Tom Zimbrod plays in this movie brings to the film, to more or less kind of bring out a balance in the movie where it has a serious overtone to it for sure, but Tom Zimbrod's performance in the film kind of just equals it out, and having a sense of lightness, if you will, to not have this tension kind of build up where it slowly starts to rebuild as the scene progresses along the way. And with those particular musical cues that you get in the movie with an introduction with certain characters along the way, I thought were done very effective with this movie. Now, the other thing I'm going to point out here too, because I'm going to pull out my phone here to kind of focus on something that I want to highlight here, because there's a number of actors that are in this movie that I'm going to say right off the bat, every single person, in my opinion, have done a really good job when it came to the performances in this movie. The first of which is Tom Hallam. I'm sure if you guys have seen my reviews that I've done here on the channel, especially when it comes to B22 films, Tom Hallam, in my opinion, is truly an underrated actor. I think he's one of the best ones out there, and he's easily one of my favorite actors of all time. And that's no joke. I think he's that good of an actor. I remember when I've said before that when I came across his movies here with B22 with Rodeo Thief, which is easily one of his best performances in his filmography, especially with the film Frog. That's what the film that made me a fan of him. But as time has gone by, you could just tell that the guy puts in all the efforts when it comes to his delivery and his performance. I'm not saying all the films he's ever been are the greatest, but the films that he participates in, he definitely does deliver a good performance with what he is dealing with in those respective stories. But this movie, in my opinion, if anyone were to see, let's say, for example, Rodeo Thief and all the other films in between up to this movie, I'll be frank with you, even though I still think he's really good in all those respective films, but coming off of the Rodeo Thief and then getting to this movie, this particular film, in my opinion, kind of pretty much puts him back in the forefront as far as like a reminder as far as why I believe that Tom Hallam is one of the best actors in the industry right now. And this movie, in my opinion, shows I'm not gonna say a vulnerable side, because we've already seen that with his performances, but there's just a certain little subtle things, little nuances about this particular character, where you come to understand that this is a guy who you learn that he had these expectations of more or less meeting your heroes, and then when you hear the whole saying never meet your heroes, that's kind of more or less in play here with this movie, without really getting into details here. But understanding how he's learned to deal with that along the way, that more or less turned him to the man that we see in the beginning of this film. And as the story progresses along the way, you start to understand what the bigger picture really is for that character that Tom Hallam plays in this movie. And then, of course, with his partnership with Tom Zimbrod, his deputy in the film, I'm going to be frank. I do remember at one split second point, I thought I would have liked to have seen Billy Blair as his deputy in the movie. But Tom Zimbrod, again, I pointed out before that in my review for The Dog, as well as for Buxton, that he's a really, really good actor. And for him to kind of play I'm not gonna say the goofy side of this film here, but really more or less the lightheartedness of the movie, and understand what he actually brings to the film and really brings to the overall story. There is a certain quality about this particular character that he plays that serves as a purpose for the overall film that I believe Tom Zimbrod does a really good job in delivering in this movie. Now, one other actor I'm going to point out here, whose name's almost escapes me right now, but it's by the name of Mr. Andrea Ziddio, who's an Italian actor, who I believe is making his U.S. debut film with this movie. This is another actor that I became a really big fan of from this performance that I've seen in this movie here so far, where he plays more or less a prisoner, an American soldier, actually, who tells him that he can point out where Billy the Kid is for Tom Helm's character to look and find him and eventually kill him. That particular character, if handled wrong, could have actually ruined the film. And the fact that you have a strong actor in Andrea to be able to deliver those little subtle things about, him being in a position where he's trying to get himself out of prison in this case, but negotiating his way out, if you will, and how he's been able to do that along the way to be able to give an incentive to the sheriff to more or less help him get out of prison. And as long as the guy keeps his word and everything turns out to be valid, then he's going to be released along the way. And that does turn out to be the case. And that's not necessarily a spoiler because we already know how the outcome of what happens to Billy the Kid. But it's really interesting to see that when you have a character of that sort, usually characters of that sort can be really a mixed bag where they serve their purpose, but there's nothing impactful about them that makes you remember them, at least in some cases, I should say. But in this particular case here, having gone back to watch the film, and I've seen this movie, no joke, well over 10 times at this point, because it's really a good movie in my opinion. But having seen his performance in this film, he's actually won me over each and every single time, where I felt like the little subtle things that I've noticed before or new things I'm learning along the way as I watch the film upon rewatching it, that made me understand the overall approach with this respective character, where he's not necessarily the bad guy by any means, and that he was obviously in a conflicted situation where he's going along with the antics of Billy the Kid, but he clearly does not want to be a part of that and does go a separate way along the way too. But what's also interesting as well is that even though this guy is in a position where he's trying to negotiate his way out of prison at this point, not once did I ever feel like there's any ill intent with this guy, where what you see is what you get. So if you see that this guy is telling the truth, you actually do believe it. And just the way that Andrea is able to make those deliveries when it comes to the performance, even with the facial expression as well too, there's an authenticity behind that I thought worked very well, very effectively for that character. And then one other actor I'm going to highlight here real quickly is Robert Keith. Robert Keith is one of those actors that I think every time I watch him, especially with the B22 film, it's like he surprises me in some little way each and every time that I come across with his performance. In this particular film, he's not the villain in this movie, but he's the guy that does aid the villain in this particular film, where he's very much a greedy person, where he's willing to go wherever the money's at. If someone's able to give him more money to, in this case, help Billy the Kid escape, he's willing to do that. Oh, I almost dropped that there. He's willing to do that. Or if the sheriff say, hey, I'm going to give you even more money if you just tell Billy the Kid to stay where he's at, he would be doing that as well too. So this is a guy who's very much a businessman, and he's very wealthy as well too. You can tell from the film as the story progresses that he's a man of power. He prefers to keep that power and very much lets it get to his head. And the greed certainly definitely got to him, and it caught up with him to the point where, I'm going to spoil this here for the movie, but he does more or less meet his demise. But it's beautiful how I think the way that Robert delivers that particular character's performance, because there's a certain little things about him that I thought worked very effective, where he has this mustache, and he also has a much more lower tone to his voice, like kind of like a huskier aspect about him too, to give him that powerful presence, if you will, that I thought Robert did a really good job. And it's not necessarily over the top stuff that we've seen him do before. It's actually quite subtle, it's like he doesn't have to boast, but you can tell by him walking in the room with this chip on his shoulder that this is a guy that clearly is letting his power just speak for itself by the way he conducts himself, by walking into a room and discussing certain things with people that he may agree or disagree with along the way. So there's little things about that particular performance that Robert delivers in this film that I think worked very effectively. And then, of course, I got to point out more or less the elephant in the room in the actor that plays the character of Billy the Kid, whose name is Mr. Paul Grant. Now, as much as he is in the movie, I'm actually quite surprised that we didn't actually get a whole lot more. Now, the movie runs about, I'm going to say, just under an hour, 20 minutes, an hour 16, 17, somewhere around there. But I was actually kind of surprised that we didn't get a whole lot more of him. But then when I watched the film again over and over and over, I actually appreciated the fact that there's this like mysticism about this kid, like that he's almost like an urban legend in a lot of ways, where when you come to see some of the backstory about what he has done that more or less led to his capture and his the killing, of course. There's something about how that was handled in this respective film that made me appreciate in this case, how impactful this character or this guy really is when it came to how important it is that he must capture this guy and pretty much kill him, because otherwise he's going to continue wreaking havoc, because he really didn't have a lot of respect for other people around, especially when it came to their well-being. But at the same time, there's a certain kindness about him as well too, that what could be very misleading, where people thought that you can actually negotiate with him, and you can, but in a heartbeat he'll be able to just shoot you dead if he wants to without a second thought. And just the way that actor in Paul had been able to deliver that with this character, I actually thought worked very well. So the character, for me, I started to learn to appreciate more and more as I've gone back to watch the film on more than one occasion, to the point where I think that how they've been able to use him, it's not a wasted opportunity. It's not a wasted character by any means. He's not just like some kid in the background. He's an effective character that does add value to the overall story as well too. And then I also want to point out too in James Storm. Now, James Storm, for people out there who are familiar with pro wrestling, they've been with WCW, TNA, Impact, had a short run on NXT. He actually appeared in the movie The Doc for a good bit there, and I forgot to talk about him in the movie, but he was actually really good in the film. And I do recommend when the movie gets released, you check that film out, especially when you come to his performance. You'll see how good of an actor this guy really, really is. With this particular film, I was actually really, really impressed with the action sequence that we get in this movie, which only lasts literally about 5 seconds. But for some reason, I remember thinking that particular action sequence that we got in this movie between himself and Tom Hallam, it was so impactful that I remember thinking, I wish we got that in The Doc. Now, what we got in The Doc worked effectively to a degree for me personally. It wasn't the best part about the movie, but with the very little we got in this film in terms of the action sequence, that was actually coordinated by James Storm on the request from Brett Benman, because Brett had told me that he had asked James to coordinate the fight scene. It was quite impactful, and I remember thinking, I wish we got more of that in this movie. And that's not a negative for the film, but it was just so good that I remember thinking, like, we could get more of that. Imagine how more exciting the film could be, which is already good enough as it is already. So I'm not trying to take that away from anybody, but James Storm is an actor that I honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really think I put too much thought into it, but having seen what he had done in The Doc, and then the very little he does in this movie here too, he definitely has a very impactful part of the story that when he's in the film, you felt his presence, and the presence he brings into this movie adds a lot more value to as far as the escalation that occurs in this film, especially when it comes to more or less the potential demise that we get from Tom Hallam's character, which he doesn't meet his demise in this movie. But it's interesting to see that how close it came to be that. And even though you know what you expect what the outcome is going to be, just having James deliver those little subtle nuances about how much of a threat he really is, and the little things he could be doing to pretty much take out, in this case, Tom Hallam's character. It's done in a way that I thought had been, if it was not handled well and not delivered in the same way that James had delivered this with his performance in this movie, it could have gone awry in so many different ways. Where even though I felt like the action sequences in The Doc were pretty good, that little moment in this movie that we get with this character, with the build up to that and the events that occurred after the fact, all done brilliantly. And it literally lasts for maybe less than a minute and a half, if that, but it was just quite impactful that I just remember thinking I would have liked to get a lot more of that as well too. But overall though, I think that when it came to the story to this film here, everything about this movie does to serve a purpose here when it comes to the conversations that we get with the various characters we get in this movie. And it has a lot of, like, I remember I asked Brett, I remember I told Brett, I should say, that it gave me a little bit of a Quentin-esque vibe to this movie, because it definitely had these wonderful dialogues where you get to learn about these characters, just beautifully written, in my opinion, when it came to why the characters behave a certain way and where they were coming from to get to this point and making these decisions that they're making now. And it just reminded me something about Quentin Tarantino. So when I asked him, I'm sorry, when I told him that I got these little Quentin vibes behind this movie, he's like, yeah, it was, a lot of it had to do from Django Unchained. And I thought, okay, well, that does make sense now that I can see that. So it was interesting for me to see that as far as the directing is concerned and the writing in this film, this is easily one of Brett Benton's best films, in my opinion. I'm going to go as far as saying that I think it's easily either my second or my third favorite, because having gone back to this movie, again, well over 10 times, each and every time I go back and watch the film, I actually enjoy the film that much more. And it comes to the point where you can clearly see that not only is Brett Benton a phenomenal writer, but he's a really, really good director. And one of the things I also want to highlight too is that for as short as the film really is, I'm going to give props to Brett, and again, everyone involved with this too, that with the amount of time that they have with this film, there's so much compacted in this movie that you have time to breathe with various characters in this film. It doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel convoluted. In fact, it actually feels really well spaced out. And what I also appreciate too, that I think Brett does a good job in just focusing on the areas that make the most sense for the overall story with the very little time they have with this film, and have an effective impact as the story progresses along the way. At least that's how I felt about it in this particular case. So there's so much about this movie that I can definitely get into. As you can tell right now, I really love this movie. So for me, that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. The only real negative about the film, honestly, is that it's just too short. Now, it's not a perfect film by any means, but it's just that I feel like with what we got in this movie, there's just so much that we could have gotten out of the film, especially when it came to the action sequence. Even though it's not really a negative of the movie, because the action scenes are that one action scene we get in this film works so good that I thought, imagine if we had more time, more resources that we could have just expanded on it further to really get a, just more of that in this film. But despite the fact that I wanted more time with the movie, I really did enjoy the film. So honestly, it's not me kissing ass by any means, but I don't have a problem with this film at all. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying that this is pretty much a damn near, even though I said it's not a perfect film, but in my opinion, for what I've gotten out of the movie and how much I enjoyed the film, because I really do love this movie, I think this is a damn near perfect film. So for me, the negatives are just very, very minuscule, because the positive outweigh by major slants there for me. So that's the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. So as you already know, I love this movie. There's nothing about this film that I remember thinking that it could have been done a little bit better, because even though I felt like the film could have been longer, there was just nothing that really sticks out for me as a major sticking point that I wish it could have been done better. Like when I saw the doc, as much as I did love the film, it was just certain action. There's just the action sequences, and with the events of like certain conversations that we get with the doc and be able to understand his background. I would have wanted that more with some of the other characters as well too. Even though that was a longer film, some of those pieces I felt like was missing to a degree. Whereas this movie, on the other hand, as being the shorter film, I felt more of that punch, if you will, where it really excelled in all those areas that I felt like that the doc didn't necessarily did well, but didn't hit that mark for me. Whereas this movie just exceeded in all those areas, and with the short amount of time that it had. So for me, I'm going to say this movie is a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, as of right now, The Killing of Billy the Kid is expected to be releasing on the Xumo platform as a Xumo original sometime in the beginning of June at this point. And I would recommend you guys follow B22 on social media, along with Brett Benton and Tiffany Benton, which I'll make sure to have the link in the description down below for you guys to click on their accounts and follow them on social media, because I do know they're going to be announcing once that film will be released on that respective platform in the very near future. And I also do know too that the doc is going to be making its debut on Xumo as a Xumo original on March 1st, if I recall correctly. So make sure you guys check out that film. Love to hear your thoughts on that movie, and let me know what you guys think in the comment section below for that review. And as far as The Killing of Billy the Kid, when that movie does get released, I hope you guys come on back to this review. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But if you haven't done so already, make sure you also follow NRW here on this YouTube channel. Make sure you guys share, like the videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there as well too. So please don't forget to subscribe, and also follow NRW on social media too, on Instagram on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Twitter at the NRW, and on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina. Also, follow me on my social media accounts for You're So Cool with Rob Medina on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And that's it for my review, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.